Corey Masisak covers the San Jose Sharks over at The Athletic. Appreciate you giving us some time here today, Corey. Let's dig into this San Jose Sharks offseason that's coming up here. And I guess the obvious one to start with is Erik Karlsson. What's your read on the situation surrounding the 100-point defenseman? Is it more likely than not that the Sharks are going to move this guy?
I think it's more like, well, it's in Erik's hands at this point. I think. I mean, whenever everybody broke at the end of the season, Mike Grier said we're going to give Erik time. We're going to let him figure out what he needs to figure out. Look, he's got 4 more years on his contract. This year was otherworldly. How much that has helped his trade value because there's still the length on the contract. There's still the injury history. It's sort of to be determined. But I mean, I think the reality of it is it basically comes down to if Erik Karlsson, is watching what Brent Burns is doing, is watching what Joe Pavelski is doing, and saying, "Hey, I want to do that before the end of my career, or let's say over the next couple of seasons." He's going to go. He's going to have a talk with Mike Grier, and he's going to say, "Hey, if you can find a place for me," and then they're going to try to figure something out. But I mean, Grier has said repeatedly that they'd be fine with keeping him. I mean, as kind of the entire roster showed this season, having this 100-point defenseman on the roster didn't necessarily hinder their ability to get a high pick in the draft. So yeah, I mean, I think look, he's been the number one story here, even when Timo Meier was sort of being bandied about as a trade possibility. The specter of being able to trade Carlson, given the financial implications, was kind of still story number one.
So just for clarity, Corey, I'm kind of intrigued by what you're saying in that I guess from way out here on the East Coast, I was under the assumption that and reading and watching the interviews from Erik Karlsson that he's like more than ready to go. Is that not the case?
Well, yeah, I mean he every time he talks about it, he says, I want to win, but I also love living in San Jose and I love playing for this team. And I mean, there's a lot of like his family, he has built a family in San Jose, and his wife and his, small children, like they love it here. And so I think he's a little bit conflicted by that. I think if he could have in a kind of a perfect world situation, Greer would say, "Hey, here's our timeline. We're going to be good again before your contract is up," and he would say, "Okay." But are they actually going to be able to pull that off? It's a whole nother story. So I mean, look, I would say, I thought that before the trade deadline, it was going to be really hard for them to get something done, but both sides were kind of motivated to do it. And now we'll see, now that they've had kind of some time away from each other. But I mean, I think if Erik does want to go, I mean, if he continues to just say like, look, I want to win, that, that I think that's, they're at least going to try to make that happen. There's also this thing that like, he could want to leave and they could want to trade him and it still might not work out. Like, I mean, there has been interest from other teams, but it's still like huge hurdles. How much money are the Sharks going to retain to make it work? What is another team going to be willing to give up given the uncertainty of how healthy he can stay moving forward? All those things kind of play into this.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's incredibly difficult contract to move, even with a 100-point season, given the injury history, given the sheer cap consequences for someone to bring a contract like that in. You're likely looking at moving out 7, 8, 10 million bucks just to be able to fit Karlsson in. So it is going to be difficult. My real intrigue with the Sharks in their summer is outside of Karlsson, what's the clear number 2 priority for the Sharks to figure out? Like, I look at this team and I say, it's an absolute mess. They're kind of in no man's land, a 4th straight year at the bottom of the standings. They're not getting any better. They don't have, this great sort of cap space scenario where they can begin to get creative and start to stockpile picks. Like, what do you view as the next biggest thing for Mike Grier to tackle this summer?
Yeah, that to me, that beyond Karlsson, that's like the most interesting thing about this offseason for them is who are they going to take with the number 4 pick? That guy immediately becomes kind of the future face of the franchise almost. And then number 2, are they like they could just sit here and do basically nothing, like just very very minimal around the edges, and basically run it back and take another run at the number 1 pick, like they kind of did. They weren't outright tanking like Chicago and Arizona were, but they ended up there, within a couple of points of getting the number 1 pick. So they could just do that and just, pair the number 4 pick and whoever it is they get at the start of the 2024 draft. And then that's like kind of your future, your Kane, Taves, Malcolm Crosby Foundation. But they're also they're not as hardline about this "we're never rebuilding" thing. They're sort of like walking that back a little bit, and so like, but they do continue to say they want to win as soon as they can. So like, I think they're going to be. I think basically the way to put it is, I think they're going to be like patient, and if someone comes like if the Rangers couldn't sign Keandre Miller and they just put him up for bid, basically, I think the Sharks would get in on that. However, that like I think that if there are like young controllable players out there that they could add to like kind of take a step forward next season, they would like to do that. Now, again, the salary cap situation is weird because they have like four. They're basically down to four huge contracts, but they're all very long. And there's not a lot of like they have like Kevin LeBanc and Radim Shimmick who are on the last year of their deal. And so like if they basically just wait those out instead of giving up like a third round pick to move one of them, then they do have cap flexibility next summer. But then they still have those four guys that are on the long contracts that are, some measure of immovable.
Just quickly in 30 seconds before we let you go, any shot they buy out a guy like Mark-Edouard Vlasic?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think Greer was pretty adamant that the buyouts are not. I mean, they're just where they're at. Like if they were 8 points away from the playoffs last year and they needed that extra $3 or $4 million to add one more player to make a run, I think they would be willing to do it. But I think they're just waiting, I think maybe another year or two before that even really comes into the conversation.
Perfect. Appreciate the insight, Corey. Thanks for hopping on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.